March 14, 1981, and the small farming community of Waterford, Wisconsin, was experiencing an early spring thaw, with temperatures reaching the mid-50s and melting the last patches of winter snow from fields and country roads. The Nelson family lived on a dairy farm 3 miles outside of town, a property with a white farmhouse, red barn, and surrounding fields that had been in the family for 3 generations. Isaac Nelson was 8 years old that Saturday afternoon, a boy with sandy brown hair cut short, green eyes, scattered freckles, and a serious demeanor that made adults comment he seemed older than his years. He wore faded blue jeans with patches on both knees, a green and white flannel shirt rolled to the elbows, brown work boots his father had bought him that winter, and a Milwaukee Brewers baseball cap he wore everywhere. Isaac had spent the morning helping his father, Robert, with farm chores, feeding calves and cleaning the barn, and at 1:30 p.m., his mother, Anne, had called him in for lunch before he resumed afternoon work. After eating, Isaac asked if he could walk to the mailbox at the end of their long gravel driveway to check for mail, a task he enjoyed because it made him feel responsible and grown up. "The mail should be here by now," Anne said at 2:15 p.m. "Go ahead and walk down to get it, but come straight back because Dad needs help moving hay bales in 20 minutes. Isaac nodded and walked out the front door, and Anne watched from the kitchen window as he started down the quarter-mile driveway toward the county road where their mailbox stood. The driveway was straight with open fields on both sides, creating clear visibility from the house to the road, and Anne could see Isaac walking steadily toward the mailbox in the distance. At 2:18 p.m., Anne turned away from the window to wash lunch dishes, and she glanced up occasionally to check on Isaac's progress down the driveway through the window above the sink. At 2:21 p.m., Anne looked up expecting to see Isaac at the mailbox or walking back toward the house, but she couldn't see him anywhere on the driveway or near the road. Anne dried her hands and walked to the front porch to get a better view, thinking Isaac might be crouching by the mailbox sorting through mail, but even from the elevated porch she couldn't see him. She called Isaac's name several times, her voice carrying across the open fields in the quiet afternoon, but there was no response and no movement anywhere along the driveway. Anne walked quickly down the driveway toward the mailbox, calling Isaac's name repeatedly and scanning the fields on either side, thinking he might have wandered off despite being told to come straight back. When Anne reached the mailbox at 2:25 p.m., Isaac was nowhere to be seen, and the mailbox door was closed with mail inside that hadn't been collected. The county road in both directions was empty and quiet, with no vehicles visible and no indication of where Isaac had gone or what had happened in the 3 minutes since she'd last seen him walking down the driveway. In approximately 3 to 6 minutes, while walking down a straight quarter-mile driveway with open fields and clear visibility, 8-year-old Isaac Nelson vanished without a trace. If you want to hear about this 40-year mystery that has never been solved, make sure you're subscribed, hit that like button, and comment where you're watching from or what theories you have. Now let's continue. Anne ran back to the house screaming for Robert, and within seconds both parents were in their pickup truck driving slowly along the county road in both directions looking for Isaac. They checked ditches and fields adjacent to the road, calling his name and expecting to see him having wandered off or fallen and injured himself, but there was no sign of their son anywhere. Robert drove to their nearest neighbors a mile away and asked if they'd seen Isaac or noticed any vehicles on the county road around 2:15 p.m., but nobody had seen anything unusual. By 2:45 p.m., Anne had called the Racine County Sheriff's Department, and deputies were dispatched to the Nelson farm to investigate a missing child. The straight driveway with its clear sight lines made the disappearance particularly baffling, because Anne had been able to see Isaac most of the way until she turned to wash dishes for less than 3 minutes. Sheriff's deputies walked the entire driveway and searched the surrounding fields, looking for footprints or any evidence of where Isaac had gone, but the melting snow and muddy ground showed only his boot prints leading down the driveway. The boot prints were clear and easy to follow in the soft ground, showing Isaac had walked steadily toward the mailbox, but approximately 30 yards before reaching it, the prints simply ended with no indication of where he'd gone from that spot. By 3:30 p.m., over 20 law enforcement officers were searching the Nelson farm and surrounding area, and the discovery that Isaac's footprints simply ended in the middle of the driveway created immediate concern and confusion. The spot where the boot prints stopped was examined thoroughly, and investigators found no other footprints, no vehicle tire tracks, no signs of struggle or disturbance in the muddy ground around the final prints. It appeared as if Isaac had been walking normally down the driveway and had simply ceased to exist at that spot, leaving behind only his footprints with no explanation for where he'd gone. Bloodhounds were brought from Milwaukee by 4 p.m., and the dogs were given Isaac's scent from clothing in his bedroom, and they tracked from the house down the driveway following the same path his footprints showed. The bloodhounds tracked to the exact spot where Isaac's footprints ended, and then the handlers reported the same phenomenon that had occurred in other baffling cases. The dogs became confused and couldn't establish any direction for continued tracking. "The scent just stops here," the lead handler told Sheriff Davis. "The dogs are telling us the trail ends at this spot, which shouldn't be possible unless he was picked up, but there's no evidence of anyone else being here." The theory that Isaac had been abducted by someone in a vehicle was immediately investigated, but the complete absence of tire tracks in the soft ground made this explanation problematic. A vehicle would have had to approach Isaac and leave the scene, and in March 1981, with melting snow creating muddy conditions, any car or truck would have left clear tracks that weren't present. The county road adjacent to the Nelson property was examined for fresh tire tracks, and while some existed from normal traffic, none corresponded to the exact time frame or showed signs of stopping near the Nelson driveway. Detective Robert Chen from the Racine County Sheriff's Department took over the investigation by evening, and he was deeply troubled by physical evidence that made no logical sense. "Footprints don't just end in the middle of driveways," Chen told his team. "There has to be an explanation, something we're missing or not understanding about what happened here." Helicopters joined the search by 5 p.m., flying low over the Nelson farm and surrounding areas and using whatever technology was available in 1981 to scan for any sign of Isaac. The Milwaukee Brewers cap Isaac had been wearing was distinctive and should have been visible from the air if he was anywhere in the open fields, but aerial searches revealed nothing. By nightfall, over 100 volunteers were searching surrounding farms and wooded areas, calling Isaac's name into the darkness and checking barns, silos, and outbuildings where a child might have wandered. But the Nelson farm was surrounded by open agricultural land with minimal places to hide, and the idea that Isaac could have reached any building or woods from the driveway without leaving footprints seemed impossible. FBI was contacted given the bizarre circumstances and potential for foul play, and Special Agent Catherine Wells arrived from the Chicago field office by 9 p.m. with resources and experience from unusual missing persons cases. Agent Wells examined the spot where Isaac's footprints ended, and she interviewed Ann extensively about exactly what she'd seen and the timeline of Isaac walking down the driveway. "I watched him until he was about halfway down," Ann explained through tears. "Then I turned to wash dishes for maybe 2 or 3 minutes, and when I looked again, he was gone, just completely gone." The 3-minute window when Ann hadn't been watching became the focal point, with investigators trying to understand what could have happened in that brief time that would leave no physical evidence. Wells theorized that someone might have been lying in wait in the drainage ditch that ran alongside the county road, someone who'd grabbed Isaac when he reached that spot and had somehow carried him away without leaving tracks. But examination of the ditch revealed no footprints or signs of disturbance, and the muddy conditions should have preserved evidence if anyone had been hiding there or had climbed in and out. By Sunday morning, the search had expanded to cover a 10-mile radius from the Nelson farm, with teams checking abandoned properties, quarries, bodies of water, and any location where a child might have ended up. The Wisconsin State Patrol issued alerts for vehicles to watch for a missing 8-year-old, and roadblocks were established on major routes, though 18 hours had passed since Isaac's disappearance. By late March, the intensive daily search operations had been scaled back after 2 weeks produced no trace of Isaac, despite thousands of volunteer hours and the most extensive investigation Racine County had ever conducted. The case generated significant media coverage across Wisconsin and neighboring states, with Isaac's photo appearing in newspapers and on television, his serious expression and brewer's cap becoming an image people recognized. The footprints that ended in the middle of the driveway became the defining element of the case. Photographed extensively and studied by experts trying to explain the inexplicable disappearance. Forensic specialists examined the prints for any signs of alteration or staging, wondering if someone had created false tracks or erased additional footprints, but the muddy ground showed no evidence of manipulation. The theory that Isaac had walked backward in his own footprints to create confusion was tested, but experiments showed this was extremely difficult to do perfectly in mud, and investigators found no return prints leading back to the house. Geologists were consulted about whether sinkholes or ground collapses could occur in that area, potentially swallowing Isaac and the mud covering the hole, but surveys found no such geological features in the driveway. Weather experts confirmed that wind conditions had been calm on March 14th, eliminating any possibility that evidence had been blown away or covered by shifting soil. Detective Chen investigated whether military aircraft or experimental vehicles might have been in the area, wondering if some kind of technology could explain an abduction that left no ground traces. But inquiries to military installations and aviation authorities produced no evidence of any aircraft in the Waterford area during the critical time frame, classified or otherwise. By 1985, the case had essentially gone cold with periodic reviews but no active investigation, and Isaac Nelson became one of those rare disappearances where the physical evidence seemed to defy rational explanation. The Nelson family never recovered from losing Isaac in such inexplicable circumstances, and they spent years searching and investigating every theory, no matter how unlikely. Robert died in 1999 at age 62 from a heart attack, and those who knew him believed the stress of living without answers about Isaac's disappearance had contributed to his early death. Anne continued living on the farm until 2008, when failing health forced her to move to assisted living, and she died in 2012 without ever knowing what had happened to her son. The farm was sold to another family, and the new owners reported feeling uneasy about the driveway where Isaac had vanished, though most attributed this to knowledge of the case rather than anything supernatural. Detective James Morrison reviewed the cold case in 2005, and he was obsessed with the footprints and the physical impossibility of the evidence, spending countless hours trying to construct scenarios that fit the facts. Morrison investigated whether someone with specialized training or equipment could have approached Isaac from above, perhaps using a crane or cable system to lift him straight up, but this seemed far-fetched and impractical. He also considered whether Isaac had been taken by someone who'd approached across the fields from a direction Anne wouldn't have seen from the kitchen window, but the muddy conditions should have preserved evidence of such an approach. By 2010, Isaac would have been 37 years old, and age progression photos showed a man with sandy brown hair who might have resembled his father, though the family feared he'd died on that March afternoon. True crime writers featured Isaac's disappearance in books about unsolved mysteries, and the image of footprints ending in a muddy driveway became iconic in discussions of impossible vanishings. Paranormal researchers proposed theories ranging from alien abduction to dimensional portals, though law enforcement dismissed such speculation as unhelpful to actual investigation. The case was featured on true crime television shows in the 2000s and 2010s, and each program struggled to explain the footprints and the complete absence of any evidence beyond those final prints. Some investigators theorized that Isaac had been grabbed by someone in a vehicle that had approached on the county road, and that the perpetrator had carried him across the ditch without leaving prints by stepping carefully on rocks or grass. But this theory required extraordinary luck or skill, and even careful stepping should have left some evidence in the soft ground that investigators had found nothing to support. The Milwaukee Brewers cap Isaac had been wearing was never found, and searches of the area for decades afterward occasionally turned up items that briefly generated hope before being eliminated as unrelated. The quarter-mile driveway where Isaac had vanished remained a source of local legend, and some Waterford residents avoided driving past the old Nelson farm, uncomfortable with the location's history. By 2020, nearly 40 years after Isaac Nelson's disappearance, the case remained completely unsolved with no credible leads or explanations that satisfied the physical evidence of footprints ending without trace. Detective Sarah Chen was assigned to review the case in 2019 as part of a cold case initiative, and she brought modern investigative techniques to evidence that had baffled investigators for 4 decades. Chen used advanced ground-penetrating radar to scan the driveway area where Isaac's footprints had ended, looking for any underground features such as old wells or tunnels that might explain a sudden disappearance. But the scans revealed nothing unusual beneath the surface, just normal soil composition with no voids, cavities, or structures that could have swallowed an 8-year-old boy. She obtained satellite imagery, if any existed, covering Waterford on March 14, 1981, hoping aerial evidence might show vehicles or activity that ground-level investigation had missed. But satellite coverage of rural Wisconsin in 1981 was virtually non-existent, and the available images had resolution too poor to discern any useful details about that afternoon. Chen interviewed elderly residents who'd lived near the Nelson farm in 1981, asking if they'd seen or heard anything unusual that Saturday afternoon, but memories had faded over 40 years. One former neighbor mentioned that he'd been working in his field about a mile away and had heard what might have been a vehicle engine around 2:30 p.m., but couldn't provide specifics about location or direction. This vague recollection was noted, but didn't provide actionable information after 4 decades, and Chen had no way to verify whether the sound had any connection to Isaac's disappearance. The theory that someone had meticulously erased their own footprints while carrying Isaac was revisited with modern forensic understanding, but experts confirmed that such erasure would leave detectable traces in mud. Chen conducted experiments using similar soil conditions and attempting to walk and eliminate footprints, and every attempt left visible signs of disturbance that 1981 investigators would have noticed. By 2021, Isaac would have been 48 years old, and age progression photos showed a middle-aged man with graying hair, though statistical reality suggested he'd likely died on March 14, 1981. Isaac's case was featured on true crime podcasts in the early 2020s, and episodes analyzing the footprints generated renewed interest and thousands of theories from listeners trying to explain the impossible. Some podcast listeners proposed elaborate scenarios involving accomplices, carefully planned routes across frozen ground that left no prints, or staging of the entire scene by unknown parties. But each theory struggled to account for the 3-minute time frame, the absence of any physical evidence beyond Isaac's own footprints, and the open terrain that provided minimal cover for sophisticated criminal operations. The case proved that even with modern technology and forensic science, some 40-year-old disappearances remain completely inexplicable when physical evidence contradicts what's known to be possible. Chen investigated whether anyone with connection to the Nelson family or farm had concerning backgrounds or had been involved in other suspicious incidents, but this line of inquiry produced no viable suspects. The rural nature of the area in 1981 meant few people had been nearby during the critical minutes, and tracking down everyone who might have driven on the county road that afternoon proved impossible after 4 decades. Isaac's younger sister Emily, who'd been 4 years old in 1981 and remembered little about that day, became an advocate for missing children as an adult, channeling her family's tragedy into helping others. "I barely remember Isaac," Emily told a documentary filmmaker in 2020, "but I've lived my entire life defined by his disappearance, and our family never recovered from losing him in such an inexplicable way." The Nelson farm property had changed hands several times over 40 years, and the driveway had been repaved in the 1990s, eliminating any remaining physical evidence from the original scene. But the basic geography remained the same: a straight quarter-mile driveway with open fields providing clear visibility from house to road, making Isaac's disappearance seem impossible given the circumstances. Chen used modern database searches to look for similar cases of children vanishing from farm driveways or rural properties during the 1980s, wondering if patterns might suggest a serial predator who targeted such locations. She identified 2 other cases from the upper Midwest where children had disappeared from farm properties in the early 1980s, but circumstances differed enough that connecting them conclusively proved difficult. The case remained in Racine County Sheriff's files as an open investigation, and new detectives who inherited cold cases were instructed to review Isaac's disappearance and remain alert for any new information. By 2025, 44 years after Isaac Nelson walked down a farm driveway and vanished, his case remained one of Wisconsin's most perplexing unsolved mysteries, distinguished by physical evidence that seemed to defy explanation. Detective Chen continued to review the case periodically, and she maintained that somewhere in the physical evidence or circumstances was a detail that had been missed or misunderstood that would eventually provide answers. "Every disappearance has an explanation," Chen stated in a 2024 interview. "Even when that explanation seems impossible based on the evidence we have, there's a rational answer to what happened to Isaac Nelson." But 44 years of investigation by skilled professionals had failed to identify what that explanation might be, and the case seemed destined to remain unsolved indefinitely. The spot where Isaac's footprints had ended in the driveway became part of local folklore, and some Waterford residents would drive past the property and point out where the mysterious disappearance had occurred. Emily organized annual memorial walks on March 14th, gathering people to walk from the old Nelson farmhouse to the county road, retracing Isaac's final known path and keeping his memory alive. "We walk this driveway every year," Emily told participants in 2024, And we try to understand how an 8-year-old could disappear in 3 minutes from a straight path with open fields, but we're no closer to answers than we were in 1981. The case stood as a reminder of how some disappearances resist explanation despite exhaustive investigation, and how physical evidence can sometimes seem to contradict what's known about how the world works. And it highlighted the unique suffering of families when loved ones vanish in circumstances that make no logical sense, leaving questions that persist for decades without resolution. True crime communities online continued to debate Isaac's case, proposing theories that ranged from meticulously planned abductions to accidents that somehow left no evidence beyond the footprints. Some believed Isaac had been taken by someone with extensive knowledge of forensics who'd managed to eliminate all traces except the boy's own prints, though this required sophisticated skills unusual for 1981. Others thought he'd encountered some kind of accident or natural phenomenon that had removed him from the driveway in ways investigators hadn't considered or understood. The Milwaukee Brewers cap that had been such a distinctive feature was never found, despite decades of searching, and its absence suggested it had left the area with Isaac or had been deliberately removed and disposed of elsewhere. Modern technology, including drones and advanced imaging, had been used to search areas around the old Nelson farm that would have been difficult to access in 1981, but nothing was discovered. The case proved that even in the 21st century with remarkable forensic capabilities, some mysteries from the 1980s remain completely unsolvable without new witnesses or evidence coming forward. Chen believed that if someone had taken Isaac, that person might eventually make a deathbed confession or reveal information, and she held hope that answers could still emerge before Emily died. 44 years is a long time to carry a secret, Chen said, and people's consciences work on them as they age, and I believe someone out there knows what happened to Isaac, even if they weren't directly involved. The straight driveway with clear visibility that should have made Isaac's disappearance impossible became the central paradox that investigators couldn't resolve after more than 4 decades. Ann Nelson's testimony that she'd watched Isaac walk halfway down the driveway before turning away for 3 minutes had never changed or shown inconsistencies, and investigators believed her account was accurate. This meant that in approximately 3 minutes on a visible path with open surroundings, an 8-year-old had vanished so completely that no evidence remained except his footprints ending inexplicably. As of 2025, the case of Isaac Nelson remains open and unsolved, and the photograph of his boot prints ending in muddy ground continues to haunt investigators who study impossible disappearances. Detective Chen instructs future investigators to never close the case, to remain vigilant for any new information, and to believe that even after 44 years, the truth about Isaac Nelson can still be discovered. The footprints tell us he walked down that driveway, Chen says, and they tell us he stopped at that spot 30 yards from the mailbox, but they don't tell us what happened next. And until we understand that, Isaac's case will remain the most baffling mystery I've ever encountered. The story of Isaac Nelson reminds us that 8-year-olds should be safe walking to mailboxes on their family's property, that 3 minutes is enough time for life to change forever, and that some families search for answers that may never come. And in Waterford, Wisconsin, where a boy in a brewer's cap once walked down a farm driveway on a March afternoon, his memory endures as proof that some disappearances defy explanation, and some mysteries may never be solved. The case stands as testament to the limits of investigation when physical evidence seems impossible, when witnesses see nothing, when every theory fails to account for the facts, and when 4 decades produce no answers. Emily continues her advocacy work and maintains Isaac's memorial, and she tells other families of missing loved ones that even without answers, remembering and honoring those who vanished matters deeply. We don't know what happened to Isaac, Emily told a support group in 2024. We don't know if someone took him or if something else occurred that we can't understand, but we know he existed, he mattered, and he deserves to be remembered even if he's never found. The footprints that ended in that driveway represent not just physical evidence but a family's grief, a community's bewilderment, and a reminder that despite modern science, some questions remain unanswered forever. Detective Chen continues to review the case, hoping that technological advances or new witnesses will eventually provide the breakthrough that has eluded investigators for 44 years. Isaac Nelson walked down that driveway on March 14, 1981, Chen says, and somewhere between the house and the mailbox, something happened that we still don't understand. and until we do, his case remains the most profound mystery I've ever worked. And in Wisconsin, where farm driveways stretch across open land and children should be safe walking to collect mail, Isaac's story endures as a reminder that some disappearances occur in ways that resist explanation, no matter how much time passes or how thoroughly we investigate.